It's strange how a single week can destroy everything you ever built. 7 days before my wedding, I thought I had it all. A man who said he adored me, a family that finally seemed proud, and a ceremony so perfect it looked like something out of a magazine. $250,000 of perfection. Malibu breeze, white orchids, and a promise I thought would last forever. I can still hear the music we chose, the way Michael whispered that I was his home. I believed him. Until the morning my credit card screamed decline in front of 3 strangers, and I realized money wasn't the only thing missing. My fiancé was gone. His phone, his car, his smile vanished. At first I thought he'd had cold feet. Then I saw the photos. My younger sister Lily standing beside him at the same resort where we were supposed to be married. Her hand on his chest, his tie my gift around his neck. The caption read, "A new beginning." I remember the taste of metal in my mouth, the silence that followed, and the way my mother told me not to make a scene. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't heal. It festers. And by the time I learned why they did it, and who was really watching me, it was already too late to be the victim they expected, because 1 week before my wedding, they stole my future. And 1 year later, I stole it back. The dress fit perfectly, maybe too perfectly. The silk felt cool against my shoulders as I turned toward the mirror, imagining the aisle, the lights, the look on Michael's face when he saw me. It was supposed to be the happiest week of my life. The planner was confirming flower deliveries for Saturday. The band had already flown in from Los Angeles, and every detail of the $250,000 wedding was checked off. Then my card declined. The clerk at the boutique apologized, assuming it was a bank error. I smiled to save face, walked out to my car, and dialed Michael. No answer. I tried again, and that's when someone finally picked up. It was Lily. My younger sister's voice was smooth and sharp, the kind that could cut through anything. "He's with me, Em," she said, almost whispering. "He's happier now. You should let him go." For a moment the world went quiet. I didn't even realize the phone had slipped from my hand until I heard it hit the passenger seat. I stared out at the gray Chicago sky, the reflection of my own stunned face in the windshield, and felt something inside me twist, like a string pulled too tight and snapping. An hour later, I was outside Michael's office. The receptionist looked nervous when she saw me, her smile faltering, as if she'd been told what to say. His desk was empty. The photos we took on our first trip to Aspen gone. The coffee mug that said "World's Luckiest Fiancé" gone too. Only an envelope lay in the center of the table with my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a single line: "You deserve someone better." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly simple after 5 years of building a life together. I had helped him write his first business plan, stayed up through countless nights editing his pitch decks, stood beside him when no one else believed in his company. And this was the return on that investment: 6 words and silence. By the time I reached my parents' house in Evanston, my body was trembling, not from anger, not yet, but from disbelief. My mother opened the door, her eyes darting away. My father stood behind her, hands in his pockets, like he was waiting for a storm to pass. I asked where Michael was. My mother's lips tightened. "Don't do this, Emily. Some things are better left alone. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise." A blessing. She poured tea like it was an ordinary Sunday visit. Lily didn't plan for this to happen. Sometimes people just find love in unexpected places. I wanted to scream, to ask how a mother could say that when her 2 daughters were entangled in the same betrayal. Instead, I looked at the framed photos on the mantel, Lily in her college graduation gown. Me at the edge of every picture, slightly blurred, slightly forgotten. That night I sat in my apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes, wedding favors that would never be used, a dress bag hanging like a ghost in the corner. My phone buzzed nonstop. Notifications, gossip sites, tagged photos. I opened Instagram, and there it was. Lily and Michael at the Malibu resort, where we'd planned to exchange vows. Her hand rested on his chest the same way I used to. The caption read, "A new beginning." I stared at it until the edges of my vision blurred. Comments flooded beneath the photo. They look perfect together. Finally, true love wins. True love. I shut the screen and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look like someone who'd been left behind. She looked hollow, but alive. My mascara had run, my hair was a mess, and yet there was a flicker in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I remembered every time I had smoothed over Lily's mistakes growing up, every time I had given Michael credit for work I had done to keep peace in his company. I thought about all the times I had stayed quiet, because that's what people expected from me, the responsible one, the calm one, the fixer. The silence in my apartment pressed against my chest. I could almost hear Lily's laugh echoing through it, sharp and satisfied. My phone buzzed again, another notification. A news headline this time: CEO Michael Cooper confirms engagement to influencer Lily Bennett. The words blurred together. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes, feeling the rage and humiliation settle into something else, something colder, more precise. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me to be the bigger person, to move on gracefully. Maybe that's what they expected. For me to disappear quietly, to fade into the background, while they built their shiny new story on the ashes of mine. I took a deep breath and whispered to the empty room. If they think I'll stay quiet, they've forgotten who I am. The clock ticked somewhere in the silence. The city outside was alive, car horns and distant laughter seeping through the window. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the last trace of tears from my face, and looked again at the wedding dress hanging by the door. It wasn't a symbol of failure anymore. It was a reminder of everything I had built, everything they had taken, and everything I was about to take back. I turned off the lights, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked against the blank page. Somewhere deep inside, a plan was beginning to form. The week that started with betrayal would not end in silence. By morning, the story had spread faster than I could breathe. My phone vibrated nonstop on the kitchen counter. Every notification was another headline, another opinion from people who didn't know me. CEO Michael Cooper leaves fiancé for social media star Lily Bennett. I didn't click any of them, but the headlines played in my head like static. I opened my laptop again, and the first thing that appeared was a photo of them. Malibu sunlight, white linen champagne glasses, her hand on his shoulder. His smile looked rehearsed, hers triumphant. By noon, my office assistant called. She sounded hesitant, as if she was breaking bad news to a patient. The firm wanted to give me some time off, she said, to handle things privately. That polite phrase meant something else. They didn't want their clients to see my face in gossip columns. My name had gone from Architect of the Year to the woman who got dumped for her sister. I closed my laptop, grabbed my coat, and walked outside. The cold Chicago air burned my lungs. People were whispering near the coffee stand, glancing at me, their eyes darting away when I looked back. I'd never been famous, but now I was notorious. That evening, my parents called. My mother's voice was low and careful. "Emily, don't give interviews. Stay quiet. Your father and I don't want family reputation dragged into this." I waited for her to ask if I was okay, but she didn't. She just said, "We'll get through this, if you keep your head down." Then the line went dead. I sat on the couch staring at the muted television. On the screen, a news anchor was recapping the modern-day betrayal of the Cooper wedding. Lily's profile filled the frame, glowing in studio lights. She spoke about finding unexpected love. My stomach twisted. I turned off the TV and poured a glass of wine that tasted like metal. The doorbell rang. Emma stood there, coat half zipped, holding a folder. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment the world steadied. "You need to see this?" she said, spreading the papers on the table. They were screenshots of business filings, wire transfers, contracts under my name. "The company Blue Haven Technologies. I found it on the Illinois Business Registry," she explained. "Michael and Lily used your credit line to open this. They even listed you as guarantor for a $300,000 loan." I felt the room tilt slightly, as if gravity had changed direction. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." Emma nodded. "I know. But look at the signature. My name was there clean and perfect, copied from the contracts I had signed for Michael's first startup years ago. I remembered him leaning over my shoulder laughing, saying, "Let me handle the paperwork, you've done enough." Emma looked at me worried. "You need a lawyer." I shook my head. "I need to know how deep this goes." For the next few hours, we combed through documents until the lines blurred. Every transaction pointed back to me. If Blue Haven collapsed, I'd be the one holding the bag. I tried calling Michael, but the number had been disconnected. Lily's voicemail was full. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house again. My father was outside trimming the hedges, pretending he didn't see me until I called his name. He sighed, wiped his hands, and said, "Your mother's inside." She was at the dining table scrolling through her tablet. I placed the folder in front of her. "Did you know about this?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Emily, please. Your sister is fragile. She doesn't need more stress before her wedding." I stared at her. "She's marrying my fiancé with my money. How is that fragile?" Her eyes lifted calm and cold. "Don't make a spectacle. We're already embarrassed enough. Sometimes keeping your dignity means staying silent." The sentence landed harder than any slap. I realized then that silence was the family currency. They traded it for comfort, for image, for peace that was never real. I left without another word. That night, I wandered downtown past the restaurant where Michael and I had celebrated our first anniversary. The window was fogged with light couples inside, leaning close, laughing. I could almost hear our younger selves sitting at that corner table, talking about dreams and mortgages and children. A notification buzzed on my phone. Lily's new post. A close-up of the diamond ring Michael once swore he couldn't afford. The caption, "Forever feels right this time." I almost threw the phone into the river. Instead, I turned it off and walked until the city blurred around me. I didn't know where I was going until headlights flashed and a black car slowed beside me. The window rolled down. A man in his mid-30s, sharp suit, steady gaze. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Emily Harris." I hesitated. "Who's asking?" He handed me a card. "Ethan Cooper," it read. "Founder, Helios Labs." My pulse quickened at the last name. "I'm Michael's brother," he said. "We've never met, but I think we should talk." I took a step back. "If this is about Lily and him, save it." "It's not," he said, his tone clipped. "It's about Blue Haven, and about how they dragged my company into their mess." The air between us felt like static. Ethan Cooper was the kind of man whose presence filled a room even when he wasn't speaking. I'd read about him, Forbes, under 30 tech prodigy, the brother who walked away from family ties to build an empire. He glanced around, then back at me. "You've been humiliated enough, Ms. Harris. But what they did isn't just betrayal. It's fraud. And I don't let anyone use my name to build lies." I folded my arms, unsure whether to trust him. "Why me?" "Because they used you too," he said quietly. "And we both deserve to take back what's ours." The wind cut across the street, lifting a strand of my hair into my eyes. I could feel the tremor in my hands, not from fear, but from the first spark of something that felt dangerously like control. I looked at the card again, then at him. "Where do we start?" His lips curved slightly, not a smile, but an answer. "With the truth." He handed me a flash drive, nodded once, and got back into his car. The taillights disappeared into the rain. I stood there, heart pounding, the cold biting through my coat, realizing I was holding the first piece of a new puzzle. For the first time in days, the silence around me didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the calm before something powerful. Back home, I slid the drive into my laptop. A folder opened full of numbers, emails, and contracts. At the top of the list, one subject line read, "Joint Venture Agreement, Harris Cooper." I stared at it, breath shallow. Whatever waited inside that file would change everything. I clicked open the email. The email loaded slowly, line by line, as if it wanted to give me time to back out. It was a scanned agreement between Blue Haven Technologies and Helios Labs, signed under two names, Michael Cooper and Ethan Cooper. My name appeared farther down, listed as guarantor for a loan I had never seen. Attached to the document was a spreadsheet showing transfers, each one bigger than the last. It wasn't just theft, it was orchestration. My stomach turned cold. I read the emails below the attachment exchanges between Michael and someone using Ethan's corporate address. But the tone didn't match the man who had handed me that flash drive hours ago. These were messages full of arrogance and deceit, instructions about hiding transactions, redirecting funds, and using my signature to back them. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. Ethan hadn't given me the drive out of kindness. He wanted something. Or he wanted to make sure I saw exactly what he wanted me to see. I scrolled further until I reached the last thread, a forwarded message titled Beverly Hills Meeting. The email was short-typed from a private account. Meet me at the Lantana Hotel tomorrow 10 a.m. I'll explain everything. EC. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Every cell in my body told me not to go, but the part of me that had already lost everything whispered that there was nothing left to lose. The next morning, the sun rose behind a thin layer of cloud, pale and distant. I drove west past the city limits toward Beverly Hills. The hotel was glass and marble, too polished, the kind of place where secrets hid behind courtesy. The lobby smelled of lemon and money. I told the receptionist my name. She pointed me toward the restaurant on the terrace. Ethan Cooper was already there, seated near the edge, overlooking the courtyard. He stood as I approached, tall, composed eyes sharp, like a man who measured everything he saw. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he gestured to the seat across from him. "You saw the files," he said. It wasn't a question. I saw them. I replied, my voice steady. And I saw my name on a loan agreement I never signed. He nodded once. Blue Haven isn't just a company, it's a funnel. Michael has been moving investor money through it for years. When he started running out of options, he used you to make it look legitimate. Then he used my name to bring in more investors. I frowned, trying to keep up. "You're saying he forged both of us?" "Yes," Ethan said. "That's why I contacted you. We're collateral damage in his little empire." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements and offshore accounts, some tied to my old addresses, others under variations of my name. He built this web to collapse on someone else if it ever caught fire. That someone is you. The weight of it hit me in waves. For 5 years, I'd built his company's image, managed his finances, believed every word he said about partnership. And now it was all a weapon pointed at me. Ethan's expression didn't soften. I cut ties with him 6 years ago after he stole my investors. I should have seen this coming. I studied him. He didn't look like his brother. His suit was darker, cleaner, his voice quieter, but carrying more authority. There was no charm, only precision. "Why are you telling me this?" "You could have gone to the police." He leaned forward slightly. "I did. But they need a full picture, not just my word. He covered his tracks with your identity. Without your testimony and the evidence you have, it's his word against mine. And he knows how to spin a story." I thought of Michael's perfect smile, the way he had convinced investors, family, even me, that he was the kind of man who could do no wrong. I knew what Ethan meant. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said quietly. "I just want my life back." "Then we're on the same side," he replied. Something in his tone made me believe him, even if trust was the last thing I had left. He opened another file. "This is the timeline of his transfers. If we act now, we can stop the next round. But it'll mean exposing everything publicly." I hesitated. "Including me?" "Including both of us," Ethan said. "He already destroyed your name. The only way to get it back is to own the truth before he twists it again." The waiter came, poured water, and disappeared. I stared at the ripples in the glass, feeling my reflection distort with each movement. I had been humiliated, betrayed, erased, but now I had a chance to rewrite the narrative. "What do you need me to do?" Ethan met my eyes. "Sign a partnership agreement. A real one this time. You'll work with my legal team. We'll audit Blue Haven from the inside, trace every transaction, and leak the results when the time is right." I let out a slow breath. "You're asking me to step into the fire again." "I'm asking you to stop pretending the fire didn't happen," he said. The bluntness stung, but there was something liberating in it. I studied the signature line on his contract. It wasn't like Michael's neat loops. Ethan's writing was bold, angular, unapologetic. I reached for the pen, but paused. "How do I know you're not using me too?" Ethan leaned back. "You don't. But if I wanted to, I wouldn't be sitting here showing you proof of what your fiancé did. You're smart, Ms. Harris. Use that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of city traffic floated from below, distant and steady. Then I signed. He gathered the papers and said quietly, "Welcome to the truth." As we walked out through the lobby, I felt the eyes of strangers passing over us. Two people bound by the same betrayal, walking towards something neither could name yet. Outside, the sky had cleared. I looked up, the sunlight almost too bright, and realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from purpose. Ethan stopped by the curb, checking his watch. "I'll send you the first batch of internal reports tonight. And Emily." He waited until I looked at him. "Don't underestimate him. Michael has nothing left to lose." He stepped into his car, the door closing with a soft click. I stood there a long time, the city humming around me, the paper in my hand still warm from where I had signed it. For the first time since that cursed week began, I felt something close to balance. But deep down, I knew balance never lasted long. By the time I reached home, my inbox had already filled with files from Ethan. One folder was marked Confidential, Helios. I clicked it open and froze. At the top was a name I recognized, written in bold, Lily Bennett. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen, waiting for my next move. Lily's name sat at the top of the report like a signature carved in ice. My sister was listed as the principal shareholder of a new company called Luma Beauty, registered in Los Angeles under the same legal address as Blue Haven. It was a brand I'd seen trending on social media, her face plastered across billboards, a story of a woman building her own empire. Now I knew what it was built with. My money, my name, my humiliation. That night I didn't sleep. By dawn, I had already booked a one-way flight to Los Angeles. I emailed Ethan before boarding, telling him I wanted to be involved directly. His reply came minutes later. "Then pack for longer than a week. We'll need time." When I arrived, Los Angeles felt too bright too fast. Ethan met me in front of the Helios Labs building, sleek glass catching the sunset. He looked more at home here than he had in Beverly Hills, calm, calculating, always half a step ahead. Inside, his office screens covered one wall, each displaying lines of data. He handed me a new ID badge with a faint smile. "You're officially a design consultant for Helios's wellness division. It's our cover to access their financial stream. Luma Beauty works with us on paper. That gives us entry." The badge felt heavier than it looked. I followed him through corridors filled with the quiet hum of machines and the soft glow of modern art. Over the next few weeks, we built a rhythm. By day, I reviewed mock product packaging for the fake project we had created. By night, we traced transactions and reconstructed Blue Haven's financial map. I used my background in architecture to layer the information. Contracts were floor plans, accounts were foundations, patterns of fraud forming structures that could crumble with one right strike. Ethan handled the technical side, calling in favors from analysts who owed him more than gratitude. We met in his private workspace after hours, surrounded by coffee cups and half-eaten takeout. He worked in silence, precise and patient, while I marked files with colored tabs until my fingers cramped. There were nights when I almost forgot what betrayal had felt like, lost in the rhythm of purpose. Around midnight one evening, I found a pattern that made my pulse race. Dozens of invoices from Luma Beauty routed through an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the same account Blue Haven used to hide investor money. I called out softly, "Ethan, look at this." He came over, leaned over my shoulder, and scanned the lines of numbers. The scent of his cologne was faint, expensive, unfamiliar. His expression didn't change, but I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "They're laundering through Luma," he said quietly. "Your sister's the face, Michael's the hand, and they're both using your name to make it legitimate." My throat felt dry. "Then she's not just complicit, she's in it." He turned to me, his eyes catching the light from the screen. That's what we need to prove. We kept working until dawn painted the city pale. He shut his laptop and rubbed his temples. I used to think being strong meant winning, he said. Now I realize survival takes something else. It takes endurance. Something in his voice cracked open a space I didn't expect. You sound like someone who's been fighting for a long time, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Maybe I have. Then he pushed back his chair, stood, and poured coffee for both of us. Get some rest. Tomorrow we dig deeper. Days blurred into nights. Ethan and I began to move in sync, speaking less, but understanding more. The air between us shifted, still professional, but threaded with quiet respect. I caught myself watching him, sometimes wondering how someone so controlled could carry that much loss in his eyes. One evening, after we'd tracked another set of payments leading to an investor in Nevada, I reached for my coat. My hands were shaking, not from exhaustion, but fear. Ethan, I can't do this anymore. It's too dangerous. They have money, reach lawyers. If they find out we're looking into this... He stopped me, his hand gently wrapping around my wrist. If you stop now, they win. His voice was calm but firm, the way you'd speak to someone standing at the edge of a cliff. I looked at him, trying to find certainty in his face. I don't want to lose what little I have left. Then don't, he said. Take it back. For a second, neither of us moved. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying. Then I pulled my hand free and sat down again. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for my next move. We worked in silence, the tension between us no longer fear, but resolve. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore, not even for justice. I was doing it because I needed to prove to myself that I could survive what they tried to bury me under. When the night finally broke into morning, the first light brushed across Ethan's face as he leaned back, watching me close another file. He smiled faintly. You remind me of myself before I forgot how to hope. I didn't answer. Instead, I saved the folder we'd been building, a compilation of evidence strong enough to bring down Blue Haven and everything tied to it. Outside, the city was waking. Inside, something in me was too. I was no longer the woman waiting for an apology. I was the one writing the reckoning. As I gathered the papers, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. It was a photo Lily at a press event for Luma Beauty, smiling beneath a banner that read, "In partnership with Helios Labs." The caption underneath was short, "You're closer than you think." I stared at it, the coffee in my hand cooling, and felt the familiar chill return. Someone knew exactly what we were doing. And they were already watching. The photo on my phone blurred as my hands trembled. I felt exposed, as if the walls around me had eyes. Within minutes, I was in Ethan's office, the city's neon lights bleeding through the glass behind him. He looked up from his desk when I entered, saw my face, and didn't ask questions. I showed him the message. He studied it for a moment, jaw tightening. "They're not just watching," he said. "They're warning us." Why, I asked. "We haven't released anything yet." "Because they know we will." 2 days later, Lily and Michael announced their wedding. Malibu. Beachfront estate. Sponsored by Blue Haven. It was everywhere: magazines, interviews, glossy invitations leaked online. Ethan watched the news feed with that calculating stillness of his, then turned to me. This is it. The stage. He didn't mean romance. He meant exposure. We spent the next week preparing. Ethan called in contacts from financial crimes, quietly looping in the FBI task force that had been tracking Blue Haven's investors. I gathered the files we'd spent months building, the evidence of forged contracts, offshore accounts, payments, under my name. Ethan wanted it to surface at the wedding in front of everyone who had believed Michael's lies. The night before the ceremony, we met in the Helios conference room, papers scattered like confetti across the table. Ethan leaned over the screen, adjusting the final video presentation. "Timing matters," he said quietly. "The footage needs to play right after the vows, when every camera is rolling." I hesitated. "You're sure this is legal?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Justice rarely comes with permission." When dawn came, the ocean shimmered like nothing bad had ever happened. The venue at Point Doom looked like a dream built for people who didn't have to live with consequences. Rows of white chairs faced the surf orchids lining the aisle. Guests arrived in silk and diamonds, the same faces that had once praised me for inspiring loyalty. I stayed hidden near the media tent, dressed in black, an anonymous figure among the production staff. Ethan stood a few yards away, phone in hand, checking signals. The FBI agents posed as event photographers, their cameras already recording. Then the music started. Lily appeared at the top of the aisle, radiant in a white gown that glittered under the afternoon sun. Michael waited for her near the altar, smiling the same way he had smiled at me when he'd promised forever. My stomach turned. Ethan's hand brushed my elbow, grounding me. "It's almost time," he murmured. The ceremony was quick, polished, rehearsed. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the audience erupted in applause. Champagne glasses clinked. Michael raised his glass for the closing speech, his voice smooth and steady. "Before we celebrate, we'd like to thank our partners and investors who made this day possible, especially Blue Haven Technologies for believing in love and innovation." He gestured toward the giant LED screen behind him. "Please enjoy a short video from our sponsors." The lights dimmed. For a heartbeat, the screen stayed black. Then the first image appeared: Michael and Lily sitting in an office laughing. His voice filled the air, careless and cruel. "She'll never know," he said on the recording. "She's too busy fixing everyone else's mess." The crowd murmured. Another clip played showing them signing fake contracts, transferring money through offshore accounts. Each image hit like a stone against glass. Gasps rippled through the guests. Someone dropped a champagne flute. On the screen, Lily's voice echoed low and unmistakable. "By the time she figures it out, we'll be untouchable." Silence. Then chaos. Reporters surged forward, flashes blinding. Guests turned in disbelief, some shouting, some recording on their phones. Lily's face drained of color. Michael spun toward the stage crew, yelling to cut the feed, but the video continued, an avalanche of proof. His investors' names, the financial trail, my forged signature. Two men in dark suits moved through the crowd. I recognized them instantly. The FBI agents flashed their badges. The music had stopped, but the ocean kept roaring behind us, steady and relentless. "Michael Cooper," one agent called out. "You're under investigation for securities fraud and identity theft." Michael froze. Lily swayed on her feet, eyes rolling back before she collapsed. A scream cut through the air as guests stumbled away. Ethan stepped forward, his presence calm amid the storm. Michael's gaze found me across the chaos. His face twisted. "You did this." I didn't move. He shouted again, louder. "You can't live without me, Emily." I met his eyes, my voice even. "You're right, but that was the old me." The agents took his arms, reading him his rights, as they led him toward the waiting cars. Reporters followed, shouting questions. Ethan came to stand beside me, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. I watched the scene unfold, Lily surrounded by paramedics, Michael shouting until the doors closed on him. For the first time, the air didn't taste of fear. It tasted like something clean, like the moment after a storm. Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts. "You know this isn't the end, right?" I turned to him. "No. It's the beginning." He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "Someone funded Blue Haven after Michael ran out of money. We still don't know who." I looked out at the ocean waves crashing against the rocks like applause and warning all at once. Somewhere behind that horizon, another storm was waiting. For now, though, the masks had fallen, and for the first time, I wasn't the one left standing in the dark. The days that followed felt unreal. Reporters camped outside my apartment, investors demanded refunds, and social media dissected every second of the Malibu wedding like it was a television drama. Yet underneath the noise, something larger was moving. The FBI's investigation into Blue Haven had only just begun. Ethan called me late one night, his voice quiet but tight with urgency. "They found more accounts," he said. Blue Haven wasn't just Michael's playground. Someone else was pulling the strings. By morning, we were in a federal conference room lined with charts and digital maps. Agents briefed us on new findings: an offshore network of shell companies tied to a single, unidentified partner. 90% of Blue Haven's post-investor transfers led to one account in Zurich. The name on that account was redacted, shielded by international banking laws. Ethan leaned forward. Michael didn't have the access or the brains to build this himself. Whoever did is still out there. The lead investigator nodded. We believe a former legal advisor helped create the infrastructure. Someone with knowledge of both your companies. That was when Ethan's jaw tightened. Alex Dunn, he said under his breath. I remembered the name. Years ago, Alex had been Helios's corporate attorney before vanishing after an embezzlement scandal. Ethan had lost millions cleaning up the fallout. Now the same man's digital fingerprints were embedded in Blue Haven's foundation. After the meeting, Ethan and I walked out into the cold air. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. He was quiet for a long time before saying, Dunn knows me better than anyone. If he's behind this, it's not about money anymore. I looked at him. Then what is it, revenge? He said simply. He always wanted to prove I wasn't as untouchable as I thought. Later that night, Ethan forwarded me an email the FBI had intercepted. It was short, sent from an encrypted account. The subject line read, Family isn't always what it seems. The body said only one line. Your brother was never the hero you think he is. I reread the words until they blurred. It felt personal, almost designed to hurt him more than expose him. I called Ethan immediately. Do you think he's trying to bait you? I asked. Probably, he said. But he's also telling me he's watching. I hesitated. What if he's not bluffing? What if he knows something that could destroy you? He didn't answer right away. If he does, then I'll face it. I spent years building a reputation clean enough to erase his mistakes. If he wants to drag me through the mud, he'll have to come himself. There was something unshakable in his tone, a calm defiance that made me both admire and fear him. Over the next week, we followed the money trail through encrypted transfers, tracing them from Zurich to a real estate firm in Miami. Every time we got close, the path splintered again. Dunn was careful, moving like a ghost between jurisdictions. I spent hours cross-referencing invoices while Ethan coordinated with the agents. Sleep became optional. The exhaustion brought clarity, a focus sharper than fear. One evening, as I reviewed statements, Ethan came to stand beside me. The soft blue light from the monitor washed over his face. I've been thinking, he said. If Dunn wants me to fall, he'll hit the one place that still matters, Helios. You think he's inside already? Maybe. Or maybe he's waiting for the right moment. The next day proved him right. A breach alert went off in Helios's system. Sensitive project files were leaked to the press, casting suspicion on Ethan's integrity. Within hours, headlines called it Helios Gate. Investors panicked, and old rumors resurfaced claims that Ethan had covered up fraud years ago. At the office, chaos reigned. Employees whispered, phones rang non-stop. Ethan stood at the center of it all, motionless. I approached him, my pulse racing. They're saying you falsified contracts, I said. He looked up, eyes steady. It's Dunn's move. He wants the world to doubt me before I expose him. What are you going to do? I'm going to show them who I am now. He turned to the team and started issuing orders, commanding the room with quiet authority. For the next 12 hours, we worked side by side, reconstructing server logs, documenting every false transaction. The FBI watched remotely, ready to intervene. Just before midnight, Ethan sent the final data file to the agents. He leaned back, exhaustion etched into his features. If I fail, he said softly, you keep going. You know how to finish this. Something in my chest tightened. No one had ever trusted me like that before. Not Michael, not even my own family. I nodded. I will. We sat in silence as the office lights dimmed. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, a low warning that felt almost human. My phone vibrated. Another email from the same encrypted account appeared. The subject line read, "Next time, check the person sitting beside you." I froze. My eyes met Ethan's. He saw the fear in my face before I said anything. "It's from him again," I whispered. "He's close." Ethan's jaw set, the calm in him returning like armor. Then let him come. I'm done running from shadows. But as the rain started against the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were already inside. The next 48 hours were a blur of movement and tension. The FBI tightened their net freezing accounts and pulling in everyone connected to Blue Haven. Reporters camped outside Helios again, shouting questions about Ethan's supposed fall from grace. Inside the building, agents filled the halls gathering files that could either clear his name or destroy it completely. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the email that said the shadows were already inside. I kept expecting someone to strike first. By the third day, the strike came. Early morning news broke the story that Luma Beauty's assets were frozen. Lily had been arrested at LAX, caught trying to leave the country with nearly $2 million in cash, disguised as marketing funds. The footage of her in handcuffs played on every channel. Her perfect hair was messy, her eyes swollen. I watched in silence while Ethan stood beside me, arms folded. "She's just the surface," he said quietly. "The rest will collapse after her." He was right. Within hours, Michael's holdings vanished into debt. Blue Haven was seized by federal authorities, and Helios's name was officially cleared. But the victory didn't feel clean. There were too many scars left behind. That afternoon, an agent called to inform us that Lily had asked to see me. My first instinct was to refuse. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pushed me to go. The detention center was cold and too bright. I walked down a narrow hallway lined with buzzing lights until I saw her through the glass. She looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence stripped away. When I sat down, she spoke first, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I didn't respond. She kept talking, words tumbling over themselves. "I just wanted to be loved. Like you were. Everyone always looked at you and saw perfection. I was the one people pitied." For a moment, I almost pitied her back. But pity was dangerous. It softened the edges of truth. I finally said, "Love isn't something you steal, Lily. It's something you build." She dropped her gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said, "because forgiveness isn't what you need right now. You need to face what you did." The guard signaled that time was up. As I stood, Lily whispered, "You always win, don't you?" I shook my head. "No, I just stopped letting people decide what losing meant." When I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter somehow, even with the weight of everything that had happened. In the weeks that followed, the storm around Helios began to settle. Ethan's reputation took a hit, at first headlines dragging up his family's old scandals. But when the FBI's full report cleared his name, the narrative shifted. One night, after days of nonstop meetings, Ethan asked me to join him at a construction site near downtown Los Angeles. I followed him through the half-built structure, the smell of dust and new beginnings in the air. He handed me a small brass key. "This will be our new headquarters," he said. "A place for people who know how to start over. We're calling it Rebuild." The name caught me off guard. "You believe in rebuilding?" He smiled slightly. "I believe in people who've walked through hell and learned how to smile anyway." I turned the key in my hand, its edges pressing into my palm. The city stretched before us, alive and restless, the same way I felt inside. For the first time in months, I wasn't haunted by what had been taken from me. I was thinking about what came next. As we stood there, the wind catching in the unfinished beams, I glanced at Ethan. What happens when done surfaces again? He looked out at the skyline. Then we face him. Together. The way he said it didn't sound like a promise of war, but of trust. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether the shadows we'd fought had truly disappeared or were simply waiting for a new name. But for that moment, standing there beside him, I let myself believe in something I hadn't dared to before. Peace. Somewhere deep down, I knew it wouldn't last. Peace never does. But it was enough to keep breathing, enough to take the next step forward. And for now, that was everything. A year passed quietly, as if the world had been holding its breath. Time softened the sharp edges of everything that had happened, but it never erased them. I learned to live with the echoes. Work filled my days. Helios thrived again under Ethan's leadership, and the new building we named Rebuild stood like a monument to everything we had survived. Yet sometimes late at night, I would still wake up remembering the waves at Malibu, the crash of applause, the faces in shock when the truth came out. It felt like another lifetime, someone else's tragedy, until I looked in the mirror and saw her eyes staring back at me. When Ethan asked me to meet him at the beach one evening, I thought it was just another of his unspoken rituals, a way to breathe after months of rebuilding. The sky was bleeding into gold, the sand warm under my bare feet. He stood near the waterline wearing a white shirt, sleeves rolled no tie for once. The breeze caught his hair as he smiled at me. "You still hate the ocean?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said. "It used to remind me of endings. Now it feels like a place where things begin again." He nodded, his gaze steady. "Then maybe it's time for one more beginning." I frowned, not understanding, until he reached into his pocket. The ring wasn't large, not the kind that screamed wealth, but it shimmered softly in the light. "I don't want to fix your past," he said. "I just want to be the man who stands beside you while you build your future." For a moment, the world seemed too quiet, the waves holding their breath with me. I thought about everything that had brought us here, the lies, the betrayals, the ashes we had sifted through. Love wasn't a fairy tale anymore. It was something rebuilt by hand, slow and careful. I said yes. When the wedding day arrived, Malibu was blazing with sunlight, the kind that made the sea look unreal. The ceremony was small, maybe 40 people. No photographers, no press, only a few close friends, and the sound of waves folding into the shore. I walked barefoot across the sand, the hem of my dress brushing my ankles, light and simple. The air smelled of salt and wildflowers. Ethan stood waiting by the arch we had built from driftwood, a single white ribbon tied at the top. His eyes found mine, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt alive. The officiant's voice carried softly over the wind. "Do you, Emily Harris, take this man to stand with you in all things?" I met Ethan's gaze, steady and warm. "I do," I said. Applause rose, mingling with the crash of the surf. I felt laughter bubbling up through my chest, light and unrestrained. At the edge of the seating area, a woman from Forbes magazine, the same one who had once covered my scandal, was smiling, notebook resting on her lap. Later, she would write a headline that read, "The woman who lost everything and built twice as much." After the ceremony, as the sun dipped low, we stood together watching the horizon. The light painted everything gold. Ethan's hand found mine. "This isn't revenge," I said quietly. He shook his head. "No, it's renewal. Justice took care of itself." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I still wonder how it all went so wrong." He squeezed my hand. "It had to. Otherwise, we'd never have found this." The music started softly behind us, the faint hum of a guitar laughter carrying on the breeze. People danced barefoot in the sand. I turned to face him again, seeing not the man who had saved me, but the one who had stayed. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was the decision to stop letting the past shape every breath that came after. I had spent years defining myself by what had been taken from me. Now I was defined by what I had rebuilt. As twilight spread across the water, Ethan whispered, "You know, when you first walked into that meeting room in Chicago, I thought you were broken." "Maybe I was," I said, smiling. "But broken things can still catch the light." He laughed quietly, the sound low and real, and pulled me closer. The waves reached our feet, cool against the sand. For the first time, the tide didn't feel like it was coming to take something away. It felt like it was returning what I had lost. Later, when the guests had gone and the lanterns along the beach burned low, I walked to the edge of the water alone. The sky above was deep blue, the first stars blinking awake. I thought of Lily somewhere far away, rebuilding her own version of peace. I thought of Michael, stripped of his power, forced to face what he'd become. And for the first time, I didn't wish them pain. I wished them the chance to understand. Behind me, Ethan called my name. I turned and he was smiling, hand outstretched. I walked back to him through the soft sand, feeling the years of anger and fear fall away with each step. We stood there, the waves whispering against the shore, the air heavy with salt and promise. Life would never be perfect. Peace never lasted forever. But standing beside him, I realized it didn't have to. Because some endings are really just pauses between breaths. And sometimes saying I do isn't a promise to another person. It's a vow to yourself to keep standing, to keep believing, to keep building no matter who tried to tear you down. If someone ever steals your dream, build another one bigger and stronger. Because sometimes I do isn't the end of a story at all. It's the moment you look at the world and finally say, I'm still here and I'm stronger than ever.